Hey everyone, let's get started up. I call the meeting to order. It's an official meeting, so we'll start with a pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all. All right. Here's the formal roll call. I see Molly, Justice, George, Lee, Paloma, Ren, and Dan. I have the city planner here with us in person, the city administrator in person, and Drew, are you online?
Drew's online. Hi, everyone.
Hey.
Hey, Drew.
Okay, so we got a community segment first, and that's on the Main Street Access Committee report. And so you're going to do an intro, and John is going to do a presentation. I just want to note that one of the first things I did as mayor was create an ad hoc committee on Main Street, and we're asking a group to think about issues from as basic as parking and transit and pedestrian access, but also to broader issues like planning appropriately for Main Street. And they've done a lot of work through a very long period of time where they had to meet remote, and I just want to say thank you for all that hard work. And then I'll hand it off to Stowe.
Well, it's been a long couple of years, but I think we've done a great job. I really want to primarily just introduce John, who's going to present the findings of the final report, and to thank all the people who participated. A long process, people came and went, but I think it's a great example of community involvement, I think. And I just want to say I was honored to be able to participate. So John, please.
Thanks, Del. We've come to you a couple times before, sort of interim reports. The committee sent in, I think, something on the order of 9 or 10 or 11 memos during the process. And the city's already responded and done some of the things that were initially recommended in our short-term recommendations. So that's and that'll show up in the report. So this is considered a draft, still a draft. We haven't had any public hearings, just public presentations, a few public presentations. I think the long-term goal would be to have this this report adopted, or some version of this report adopted as a supplement to the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan at the very end, under next steps in 2017, had 3 next steps plans that should follow, and one of them was an urban design plan for Main Street. So we see this as a sort of fulfillment of that commitment, and we'd like to see this sort of kick off a public comment process and an editing process and eventually an adoption process. We started off with a brief history of Main Street in the context of the city, and I think the key, I'm only going to hit the highlights and the recommendations. The report is brief. It's only 20 pages or so, so anybody who really wants it can read through the whole thing in probably an hour. So we're going to highlight the recommendations primarily and not the background reasoning and that sort of thing, but I'm going to try to move through it fast so we have room for questions if needed. I think the main key sentence in this brief history is that the initial Main Street access problem persists to this day. From Bank Square on the west to Fountain Square on the east is more than 1 mile, in addition to a half mile up from the train station. Most people will not walk more than a quarter to a half a mile before giving up or getting into a vehicle, and that's pretty accepted science among urban designers. So it's very difficult to expect people to walk the full length of Main Street, and that's primarily why you have a car problem, is because people feel like they need a car, and sometimes they need it 2 or 3 times to access all the places they want to go on Main Street. The problem was solved back in the 1890s and 1930 when we had a trolley in Beacon. It came by every 7.5 minutes. They had up to 9,000 riders a day. It made the linear length of Main Street not a problem. It's not that easy nowadays. We do have the loop bus system, but it doesn't work like the trolley did. So we started off with walkability. We think that's the highest priority in the villages, or in the city, I'm sorry, is to make the city walkable, make the sidewalks work, comfortable, easy to use. The main sidewalk issues were there's a problem with obstructions on sidewalks. A lot of people put up signs and tables and other things that reduce and almost deliberately reduce the walkability of that storefront because they want to slow you down, so they put the sign right in the middle of the sidewalk, as opposed to out by the curb where it doesn't block the clear way for walking. Some places the sidewalks are too narrow. It's a function of where the trees were and how it developed. Some things you can fix, some things that are going to be harder to fix. And then there's a problem of sort of incompatible or auto-oriented frontages. The car wash, parking lots that face on Main Street, those sorts of dead zones for people who walk really inhibit people from strolling down Main Street and sort of on a casual basis continuing when they see a long frontage with a really uninteresting storefront. It makes them want to turn back and get back in their car rather than going from store to store. The recently constructed Main Street curb extensions and repaving and striping really helped a lot. That happened during our process. It was very hard to do some of our inventory work because it was in the middle of the pandemic. The pandemic started the month after we were appointed, speaking as for the committee in this sense. Really made getting together and having any public workshops or comment sections very difficult, having open meetings. We did everything by Zoom. And because Main Street wasn't rebuilt until 2/3 through the process, it was very hard for us to do like a parking survey because the conditions were just out of whack. We're in a construction zone, or the pandemic was inhibiting all sorts of things. But here are the key walkability recommendations, 2 of which have already been done, showing progress. We designed it so that the recommendations are in the form of a checklist, so you can check them off on the digital version as they are done. So the crosswalks are restriped all along Main Street. There's yellow crosswalk signs at primary intersections. We would like to see the sidewalk clearway, which is in the zoning law for the Main Street district, enforced so that wherever it's possible, you could have an 8-foot clearance so people can walk side by side or walk past each other without getting into single file. We suggested lead pedestrian intervals at the main traffic signals. That gives the pedestrians a head start across the crosswalks before the left turners come in. We would like to see a commitment to a re-energized tree planting program with a targeted tree cover amount. A lot of cities are doing this. They do a survey, and there's programs out there that you can say, okay, we're at 24% tree coverage. We'd like to be at 30% by some year, and then work it into the budget process and through volunteers and whatever else, build up the tree cover. One of the major complaints we got through the process from public and everybody is public restrooms are a real problem on Main Street. The restaurants are overwhelmed. They don't want to open their restaurants up for public restrooms in many cases. So we suggested a couple places where the city could open up facilities that they have control over, so that those are open on the weekends and publicized on the websites and that sort of thing, so on parking maps and whatever else. So the public would have a place to take care of business. And then one of the most interesting parts, I thought, was we identified this possibility for a new public park on Main Street in one of the most prominent locations in the city, right at the waterfalls near the Roundhouse. There's roughly an acre property. It's a triangular property right above the falls. That's half owned by the Roundhouse and half owned by MTA. MTA's willing to give up that property and create a rail trail there. I don't know what the timetable is, but the word last part I heard is that they're going to transfer it to the county, and the county is going to work on a trail study to figure out how to implement it. So half that property would be available for park purposes, I think. And the other half is in the floodway, completely unbuildable, very narrow. So the Roundhouse can't actually use it for anything of substance. So we think that that would be a great place to have a public park right on Main Street and at the creek. We did intersection studies. The 3 intersections we identified were all on the east end. The city has actually gone through and done projects for the west end up to Teller most recently. And then previously, they had done from Teller down to South Street, I think. So the 3 intersections we identified were East Main Street, which I think is the highest priority. It's really an overlooked intersection, I think. There's suggestions of how it could be redesigned with curb extensions, shorter crosswalks, narrower street widths, street trees. So you can see the top and the projected ideas on the bottom all can work. You would increase parking, increase landscaping, and make it easier to cross the street, which is not that easy to do right now.
And John, just quickly, it looks like the cars coming off of East Main, they would be level, right? They wouldn't be kind of...
You mean in the dip where the tracks are?
Exactly, yeah.
Once the tracks are taken out, you could regrade that so you wouldn't have that sort of bump and up the hill, make a steep stop sign, you know? So that would help a lot. And presumably that'll happen once the MTA transfers control. We could get rid of the tracks through there. Fountain Square. Fountain Square used to be, and from as far back as I could find maps, a real prominent square in Matawan with a horse trough fountain in the center, and a real center of activities. And now it's sort of like a parking lot. And it's not only like a parking lot, there's 2 places where cars actually have to back out into the intersection from the parking spaces, across sidewalks even. And Leonard Street is not squared up. People come down that hill too quickly. So there's a lot of room for improvements there. As you see, we'd like to bring back the Fountain Square and create a little green space on the corner rather than 5 parking spaces. And we show how you can create 4 or 5 replacement spaces just by making the on-street parking work a little cleanly. The toughest intersection is Churchill because of the steep hill. The way it works now is not very useful, and particularly for pedestrians to climb that hill from the Churchill Street parking lot. That land where we show here, I don't know if I have a cursor. Yeah, I do. You do. Over here, next to the church, that is actually MTA land. So presumably when the rail trail right away gets transferred and the city can work on making that more pedestrian friendly. You could actually put in a ramp to get up that hill, wrapped around a little pocket park. They would have actually really nice views of Mount Beacon. So a high priority on getting pedestrians from that parking lot up that hill safely and with ADA compliant access. The intersection itself is very difficult. I suggested curb extensions so that you would have better visibility in both. You wouldn't have cars parked close to the intersection, especially on the curve side. That's where people come around and can't really see around the curve. So if you take the parked cars away from there and shift the spaces elsewhere on that street, then that opens it up so you can see a crosswalk there. People cross all the time there, so you might as well give them a crosswalk and make it legal so that they have better visibility from cars coming around the corner. But that one's a tough one. That would have to take some modeling on the scene. We did the best we could but I think there's some negotiation that needs to happen around that intersection. We looked at lighting. Lighting has a mix of 4 different lighting types on Main Street. The West End has very low acorn shape, almost too low acorn lamps, traditional forms. They're much better than most of the other lighting on Main Street, but there are actually too many lights. We suggested you take out half the lights and use them to replace the highway lights that are in the center of Main Street, so you have a more consistent pattern, because that area has been overlit. The lights are brighter than they need to be, or they're not brighter than they need to be, they're just too many of them. They're very close together. As you can see from the picture here, it's really well lit. And if you we think if you had half those many lights, you would still have safe lighting on that street, and you would have a number of fixtures to be able to go farther up the street with a consistent pattern and get rid of the really obnoxious lights, which are the 40-foot high highway lights in the center of Main Street that light up the top of trees more than they light up the sidewalk in some cases. They also broadcast light into second-story windows, which makes it hard for people to live up there. On the West End, you have very nice lights, but they're a little far apart and sort of not consistently far. The spacing is odd, so you might need a couple replacement spaces in there. But we make suggestions so that you would have low lighting below the pedestrian scale, below the tree level, so you would light up the sidewalks, not the trees. And you would have historic type height lights that were consistently all up and down Main Street. They were compatible with the architecture, and the light was kept below the window, second level window, so you don't get the glare in the upper stories, since so many more people are living on Main Street these days. We have a chapter on bicycles. The primary takeaway, and I would suggest that this is one of the prime high priority, what I would say would be the high priority recommendations in the plan, is you really need a bicycle plan. You've done planning on almost every other aspect in Beacon, but never a bike plan, and Beacon is set up to be able to, because of its short interconnecting block system, it could be a high leverage place for bike access. So we suggest sort of a first cut at bike routes through the city, but we think you really should try to get a state grant to do a bike plan for the city and bring in real experts who know how to do this sort of thing. We suggested a bike boulevard that would run on Cedar Street, so it would connect the schools on the north to the South Avenue Park on the south. And it would be set aside for high priority bikes and pedestrians, so the kids would have a really safe route to schools. And that locals would still be able to go on that street with their cars, but no through traffic would be encouraged on that street. So there would be barriers so that you would prevent people from using that as a shortcut to get up to for Plank or whatever. And that could be done on a temporary basis to see how it works, to work with the homeowners to make sure they're comfortable with it, and then phased in as it proves to be a success. But safe routes to schools is really important, and a bike plan, I think, is critical for Main Street access and access all over the city. We have a chapter on transit. Transit really hasn't worked to replace the trolley system very effectively. The buses, although free is great, the buses are too big for Main Street. They're not scaled right for the size of maneuverability you need to get in and out of spaces on Main Street. They don't work on direct routes, the free bus system, so it works on a figure-8 system that takes you up to the mountain and only flows one way on Main Street. So if you're on Main Street and want to go to the train station, you have to go visit the mountain first, which makes it a real disincentive to use. They're on 25 to 40-minute intervals, when it should be. What works for a bike or a transit route on a main street is a 10 to 15-minute interval. So nobody needs a schedule. They just go to a bus stop and wait, and pretty soon a bus comes along. They don't have to schedule every stop to meet at the train station, which they often don't do. And then it ruins that connection to the train station. So if you have a 10 to 15-minute, 20-minute interval, then people at the train station would know that a bus is going to come soon, one way or the other. We suggest smaller, more maneuverable buses with lower carriages for easy on and off access for wheelchairs and people with disabilities. And a route that essentially goes up and down Main Street on a 10 or 15-foot interval. To make buses really work, you have to have a sense of frequency and reliability, predictability. One of the big ideas, which is held over from the comprehensive plan, is to create a series of transit parks along Main Street. So every 3 or 4 blocks, there would be a bus stop with a pocket park. So instead of stopping at a parking lot or a bland bus stop that has no attractions in it, you would stop at a park that was either starts at the train station with a square, City Hall, the county center, the post office, the library, and down the line. So you would have a pocket park at every bus stop, and it would organize people to know this is where I go to stop to pick up the bus. And for visitors, there would be a bus shelter with transit information, route information, local attractions, everything you would need to know for visitors. So each of those squares that we've suggested is multi-purpose to create green spaces along Main Street that are also transit-friendly and organized. So we're suggesting in our recommendation that at least 2 of those pocket parks, the city move forward with some sort of request for proposals to come up with a development scheme for those things. Probably at Veterans Place, which has been identified in the comprehensive plan as a good place to have a central pocket park for the center part of Main Street, and in front of the Dutchess County Motor Vehicle Department. And so we show conceptual plans for what these parks might look like and how they could be framed by buildings so they're active and secure sorts of places rather than sort of facing parking lots or on corners with lots of traffic noise. The final 2 chapters are on vehicles, cars, primarily. We have a section on traffic calming, how to reduce speeds on Main Street. We had originally suggested 20 miles per hour, but the state just passed a law allowing cities and villages to go to 25 miles per hour citywide. So we think that would be a good start, and it would involve less signage if all the streets were consistent. If you reduce vehicle speeds to under 30, down to 20 or 25 miles an hour, you make safety much, for pedestrians in particular. They not only, the cars are moving slow enough that they can see them and you can make eye contact. But the statistics on pedestrian deaths are just really bad right now. There's a 40-year high in pedestrian car crashes. It's up 54% in the last 10 years. And for 2 things, more people are walking than they used to. Cars are becoming higher, the fronts of them, so they can't see pedestrians. And they're bigger and heavier, so when they do have an accident, there's more likely to be a serious injury or fatality. So to keep the cars slow is a real act of pedestrian safety and protecting lives. You already went through and striped the Main Street to narrow the the lanes or make them consistently narrow so that people automatically sort of slow down because there's a sense of not wide open spaces. We suggest always stop signs at every intersection, and the city has already started doing that. Some of the intersection Main Street didn't even have stop signs. So the city has started that process. It hasn't completed, but I've been told that spring they're going to get a lot more done. And we think you should consider stop signs, raised crosswalks or raised intersections at a couple places along Main Street to prevent, in those areas where you have a sort of a long straightaway, that people don't pick up speed. The main light at the drugstore there, I've seen it, people speed up to beat the light. And while they're speeding up, they're also looking at the light just in case it turns yellow. So who's looking at the pedestrians or the crosswalks? Something as simple as a red blinking light or a stop sign might work better, make everybody stop and proceed after they establish eye contact with the people the rest of the people who are in the intersection. Traffic signals don't always work with Main Street situations, if you can avoid them. And the final chapter is on parking strategies. That's, sort of after bathrooms, I think it's the number 2 complaint. Or maybe it's number 1, I don't know, it's hard to tell. The committee looked hard at the options and we spent a lot of time on parking. The recommendations are that the Beacon should not add any new large parking lots. That's sort of a 70s approach to parking. That's how they did it. They knocked down big chunks of the city and created big parking lots back in the 70s, and you have these sort of big dead spaces on Henry Street and places like that. I know you need the parking, and what we've suggested is there's ways to do it without expanding parking lots. So phase 1 was to go look at every parking space in Main Street area and figure out how to use the existing asphalt more efficiently. And we came up with something on the order of 170 parking spaces that could be created just by restriping. So we have, and I won't go through them in detail, but every lot we sort of looked at for how could add a few spaces here, a few spaces there. We added 12 spaces on Henry Street. We've suggested that you put parking on the east side of Fishkill Avenue where there's no parking right now. Just by moving the center line, you could create a number of parking spaces going at 1 block up before you get to the curve at Verplank. We did do a parking survey. We had to sort of wait until late in the process before the pandemic and the parklets and everything sort of settled down. So we looked at it last October on a beautiful sunny Saturday during the peak leaf season, so it was a real high tourist day. We figured that was sort of a peak day. And you can see the numbers there. There is plenty of parking, but not everywhere where you would want to park. So Main Street itself on that Saturday afternoon was 100%, well, it's 98% full. So that's where people go. They park on the street on Main Street. And then the East End also had their parking lots relatively full. So those are the 2 peak areas. But if you go half a block off Main Street, we found a lot of parking places. Henry Street lots were not nearly full. The county lot at Elm Street was not nearly full. It was only 51% full on a busy Saturday. So the problem really seems to be localized, particularly on the East End. The Churchill lot, the lot behind Van Nydek, certainly Main Street. People want to park on Main Street and be close to their destinations. I think the biggest strategy, we have a number of strategies shown up in the plan, but the biggest one is to stripe side streets. Not only stripe Main Street, but stripe the first block or even the second block of off Main Street. Because people don't park there. Public is worried about parking there. They're not sure if it's public, it's legal, People are worried about blocking driveways, and the parking is very inefficient on side streets because of there's no striping. So even by just striping those spaces, you're going to gain a number of spaces, and people would be more apt to park within that first block of Main Street if they saw them striped. Here are short-term parking recommendations, a couple of which have already been done. Liza Street was restriped with 9-foot spaces, and we got, I think, 7 or 8 new spaces there. If you striped Eliza Street, you would get 4 or 5 more spaces. So we just on that one block, we suggested just by restriping, you get 12 new spaces. The city and the committee worked on parking signs so that there was consistent signs, and that's been done. So the public parking lots have consistent blue signs with arrows and restrictive limits on parking, very clear. Everything was sort of piecemeal in the previous go-around. I'm not going to go over these in detail because we talked about a couple already, but these are short-term things that primarily involve restriping or reorganizing existing parking or existing asphalt. A big one is the county lot is really inefficiently laid out. Just by redoing the back half of it, not even the front half, you could get 37 new parking spaces just by restriping and a little bit of grading work. So what happens if after 3 or 4 years you've done all the 170 spaces and you still think there's a perceived parking problem? So we have a phase 2 and a phase 3. If the first phase doesn't work, you can move on to the second, sort of a long-term look at what might happen. So the phase 2 involves consideration of paid parking. I know a lot of people don't like paid parking, but it's a proven way of managing parking demand. A lot of people park all day on Main Street. You don't get the turnover that you really need. A lot of employees park all day in prime spaces. And the real peak problem for parking, the real problem for parking is weekend parking, when it's primarily the tourists who are overloading the parking spaces. So right now, the city residents are paying to subsidize not only cars, but subsidize out-of-towners to park on their Main Street. So we've suggested you could consider paid parking starting only on Friday, Saturdays, and Sundays to take advantage of tourists paying for their own way in terms of parking, the need for parking improvements. The city owns 9 acres of parking. That's a huge amount of real estate. And some of it is in really prime locations in terms of value. So if you could come up with alternative strategies for how you could retain the parking but redevelop some of those lots for affordable housing or office needs or other sorts of high priority needs for the city, you would bring tens of millions of dollars of assessed value into the city coffers. If phase 2 doesn't work, and we're looking way down the line, although this could happen in a shorter time frame if the city chose, we looked at parking structures. There are 3 locations in the city where parking structures could happen relatively efficiently. The county center lot, on that back portion, you could put a 2-story parking structure with 3 levels and get up to 290 spaces. So a real net gain of parking there, which would handle almost all the parking needs of the West End, or at least the surplus parking needs going into the future. Eliza Street is set up so that it's big enough lot that you could put in a ramp and put in 3-level deck there and have enough parking in that deck to be able to rebuild on the Henry Street slots and bring them in. We show one for affordable housing and one for medical offices to build off the office space that's already there. We show how you can make parking lots relatively invisible through liner buildings, so that they're not these sort of hulking slabs that most people identify with parking structures. But parking structures are expensive, and so you have to figure out the balance between redevelopment and the assessed value of new development on all those big surface lots that you own versus the cost of a parking structure to replace those. And now we think that's probably a long-term solution. One place where it might make more sense is on the east end, because that's where we identified the hardest place to find parking, around the curve and down the hill and towards East Main Street. It's very tight in terms of parking. So you can park on Henry Street and walk down, but it's not as convenient as people would like. So you have the Churchill lot, which is down the hill near the creek. It's not ideal because it's creek frontage, right along the Greenway Trail. You really don't want to have a big surface parking lot if you could avoid it. It's also on a hill with the pedestrian access problem to Main Street. But parking actually likes hill. Parking structures like hill because then you can eliminate the internal ramps. It makes the parking lot cheaper and more efficient. So you can use the hill to have 2 levels of parking with entrances at 2 different levels. And rather than just a parking structure, we showed how you could combine a parking structure with a net gain of 90-some spaces, as well as affordable housing on top, so that you would have a place where the city on its own property could sponsor an affordable housing project and dictate the terms of how it's built. That's the run-through. The back cover is sort of putting Main Street in the bigger picture, how it's integrated with Greenway Trails and a boulevard system and a bike boulevard system, and how you could have that access both the mountain and the riverfront parks all connected to Main Street. So that's the short version. I don't know how, not too bad on time.
Cool. Any questions from council or comments?
I had a question about parking. I was wondering if the committee looked at all at residential parking permits. That's more about the idea of protecting parking for residents at certain times when employees or visitors might look at it. I'm just curious if it was something that came up in your discussions.
Yeah, we talked about it. I didn't think there was a need for it. Maybe if those places were striped and there was an influx of parking on the side streets, that you might want to do something in terms of residential permits, especially if there was a fee involved. We talked about if you did institute paid parking, you could have a residential permit so that on certain days or certain time frames, residential parking would be free for people who live in the city. And that way you could really target outside visitors for the parking fees. So we did look at it. We didn't come up with any recommendations because it didn't seem needed at this point.
John, I have a question. The parking at the east end, which is all red on the map, which matches my experience of parking on the east end of Main Street as well.
Yep.
I see a Phase 3 recommendation here for a parking structure along the creek, but I don't see Phase 1 and Phase 2, and I imagine that's because there's not a whole lot of options that we have down there, and it's rather congested. And I'm just wondering if there were any Phase 1 and Phase 2 conversations about parking around the bend.
Yes. There were in a couple, I didn't go into them, but for instance, Herbert Street is wide enough to have on-street parking on one side. There was a couple of, even the area just north of the Main Street, East Main Street intersection, that's striped off. You could put 5 more parking spaces there.
There used to be.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and they were taken away, and the street's wide enough. I measured it the other night, and you could have, I estimated 5 new parking spaces there before the street gets narrow again. Yeah. That park property that I talked about near the waterfalls, the city has a right-of-way that goes over the tracks there. Once the tracks were removed and it was graded so that it was a little easier access, you could put some parking back on that far end for park users. it's not easy in that area. The MTA actually, that area just east of the church on the Churchill Street intersection is actually owned by MTA. So once you got that, you could use that parking lot right below the church for public parking.
Oh, interesting.
So there are some ideas. Paid parking would help in that area as well. The metering systems are very sophisticated these days, so that you can actually program to not only escalate the costs on Friday, Saturday afternoons when the peak is there, you can even make the parking on the east end more expensive than the parking in the center as an inducement. And the other thing that we pointed out is that the free bus is a mechanism to solve the parking problems. If the bus was really efficient, people would park at the DMV lot and take the bus down to the east end and back. But right now, the bus only goes east, it doesn't go west, so you can't actually go back to your car the way the bus route is set up. So if you change the bus route, you could perhaps, and people knew that they could jump on the bus and get down to the east end without having to worry about parking. There's a lot of parking on in the center section of Main Street that could be put in play.
Trying to picture two of those buses trying to pass each other on Main
Well,
Street. So we definitely have to
it's going to be
balance
hard to
that.
get two buses. I'm trying to get one bus that works like a back and forth. And, you know, I've driven it, so it takes essentially 9 or 10 minutes to go from the train station up to the east end, turn around and come back. So you could have a bus that comes by every 10 or 15 minutes with the stops involved and everything. So that's not bad. If you could park at the DMV lot, walk out to the road, pick up a bus, and go down to the east end, if the parking is really bad down there.
I think there's also that lot at Liberty and East Main Street that the city owns, so that might be something we want to look at prioritizing, restriping, if that's an option.
City doesn't own it.
Oh,
We've
sorry.
been in conversations.
Oh, sorry, that's right, that's one we don't own. So if we did, yeah, that might be something where, if there might be an option too, to talk to the, I think it's a volunteer fire department, they use it like for Christmas tree things, but that might be an option that they're open to maybe in the short term. So, but yeah, the city's in conversation, so.
That's mentioned in here as well.
Well, cool. Very extensive, exactly what I'd hoped for. So, and anything else from the folks here?
Just if it's in here, I haven't gotten to it yet, but was there any discussion about public art and the role of art in all of this?
There was discussions about everything, so I can't say there wasn't, but there was no recommendations on public art that I remember, other than that those sort of bland parking lots that are there now could be used for a variety of different things, including those sort of series of civic spaces that are used for, and all of them could have art as part of their
Sure.
park component.
Yeah. Maybe a outdoor amphitheater, I don't know.
Well, the one at Veterans Place
Veterans.
was designed with a small amphitheater as a theme, and
Yeah.
you could do it, the one that I
You and I have
suggested.
talked about it a few times.
Yeah,
I'm
for
just
City
making
Hall
another
Park, you
plug
could
for it.
also do that, or down by the dam.
Yeah.
I was also curious in terms of other things that you discussed, if you talked about loading zones or access for businesses. There's a lot of large trucks that end up double parked, which is also an issue. And then also if you discussed ADA or handicap spots, there aren't any on Main Street, and recently had my parents-in-law visit and they noticed and complained.
Yes, we talked about both of those things. There's things that we were frustrated and didn't get into the final report, and those two things are things that I sort of regret that we didn't be a bit more specific about. But let me just say that for loading zones, we looked at those. It's very difficult to do a loading zone on Main Street because you take up essentially 4 or 5 parking spaces to do a proper loading zone, and you don't want trucks backing up on Main Street. So it's very awkward. There are places where trucks park on Main Street that maybe not are the best place to mark a truck loading zone, But they work. In front of the ice cream shop, for instance. Trucks park there. And I did make an attempt to come up with a map for loading zones, and I decided not to put it in the plan because it wasn't well thought out enough, I think. But that is something that should be a follow-up. The committee did put together a business survey that specifically was targeted at loading because we knew that that was a problem. And they distributed it to, as far as I know, almost every business on Main Street, and they got almost no returns. And that was supposed to sort of flush out where the parking really needed to be, and we got so limited number of returns that it was not statistically valid as a cross-section. So loading zones, we talked about having them as you turn a corner, have the first space or the first two spaces. It's difficult. And then ADA is the same problem. It's almost impossible to put an ADA space on Main Street. It's not wide enough, and you need a whole side section where you can unload. So a handicap spot on Main Street has to be like 15 feet wide, and there's just no place on Main Street. So we put an emphasis on those in all the parking lots that exist, and we tried to work on a couple spaces that are one spot off of Main Street on the side streets where you had low curbs or no curbs, so you could take advantage of it there. But it's difficult.
For loading zones, I had an anecdotal conversation with a business owner, and tell me if there's no precedent for this, where you could potentially have temporary loading zones and perhaps mark out a couple of places the night before if you know that you're getting a delivery, and have that be approved and sanctioned by the city, and then remove them. So it's not that it's a permanent or perpetual loading zone, but some sort of system where businesses can reserve spots when you know a delivery is coming and have that be on a regular schedule.
I think it might be interesting to talk to the city about something like that. It'd be hard to administer.
Right.
The idea that I get, and maybe I'm wrong, is that it's not a problem if you are loading early in the morning.
Right.
Yeah, it's a problem if you're loading on Friday afternoon or Saturday, so anytime during the day, which is, it used to be that trucks used to load early in the morning and it was not a big problem. But nowadays they have bigger trucks that have longer routes, so they can't time it, so they're always there early in the morning. They're there anytime during the day. Mm-hmm. So it's impossible to really have the, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. loading zone anymore. It's very difficult to do that, and that's one of the major problems with figuring out how to make loading zones work.
Right. So maybe that wouldn't solve the losing a few spots during peak parking hours, but they wouldn't have to be everywhere across the city every weekend. Maybe.
Yeah. The thing about parking meters and is that they're incredibly flexible now because they're computer-driven as opposed to crank-driven. And so you can program any way you want. You just have to make enough money off the revenue to make it worthwhile to set them up and to provide the money for enforcement, because otherwise there's no use doing it.
All right. I just want to thank the full committee. I mean, obviously, John, you presented, and Stowe, you were the chair through the process, but there are others in the audience who are also members of the committee, and I just ask you to stand so we can say thank you. You got a minute? All right. So as John said, we try to divide, when I gave you the charge, to divide the world into quick hits, kind of medium term, long term, and I kind of heard each of those components there. Some of the quick hits or quick wins are already in process, and I think the city can do more of those as we go. The medium term and the longer term obviously take some time, and so we will be kind of figuring out how to incorporate some of this, whether it's into the comprehensive plan or into our capital projects or into things that we do as we go. So I just want to offer that up, and thank you all for your time and your effort. And I just as we wind it down. I just wanted to make sure that you all had an opportunity to be here and hear it. If you have comments in addition, from being on the committee, I think we will do a set of public comments shortly, and you can include them there if that works. Is that all right, everyone?
And Mayor, if I could, I just want to see if John wants to be excused because he has a long drive tonight. So at any point, you can leave now. I just
Yeah, I don't know if it's snowing yet, but
don't, okay.
I'll wait for the comment period just in case.
All right. You might be waiting a while.
Yeah, you might be here a while.
Well, I'll see how it goes. I
all right.
might sneak out, I'm sorry.
Okay. So I appreciate that. The next one, we've got two public hearings. One, I will take a motion to adjourn the public hearing that was scheduled for this evening on the pilot agreement
Mayor,
for Tompkins
you
Terrace.
have public comment before public hearings.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But,
Okay.
but it's good to say that the one is going to be adjourned.
All right. So, sorry. We are going to be adjourning that public hearing because we're not ready, right? Although we were required to set it for this evening because that's what we voted on. So on that one, we expect to adjourn. The other public hearing
You didn't
is,
say which public hearing it was.
this is the one regarding the pilot agreement
For
on
Tompkins
Tompkins
Terrace.
Terrace. All right, that's to be adjourned. The one that will occur this evening is on new construction requiring all electric. And you're right, sorry, I didn't look at the list. The public comment is next before the public hearing. So for those people who have a public comment other than the public hearing on electrification, this would be the time to do that, and you have up to 3 minutes on any topic other than that one. And I'm looking down the list of people who signed up for a comment, and the only one that's checked general public comment is Teresa Kraft. And so Teresa, if you want to do that and any comments that you had on the Main Street Committee as well, go right ahead.
Nice to see a full crowd in here. Hard as it is, I will stick to one topic. Tonight's presentation by the city's planner and the Main Street Access Committee. I can't speak for my fellow committee members, but I can say it's been a lot of work to serve as a resident on the committee since its inception, as well as an honor. To clarify, there were over 40 detailed memos sent to the city. As an individual, I urge the city to continue to find value in this important all-volunteer committee and let this ad hoc group continue to meet and serve the city. This is a highly dedicated and intelligent group of individuals looking out for the quality of life for all Beacon residents and tourists alike. I believe the Access Committee did not get a chance to follow through on our initial handicap accessibility conversations as much as we should have, as well as so many other topics that are still hanging in the balance. Again, I encourage this council and administration to continue this committee's charge under the direction of its newly installed 2 co-chairs. The Main Street Access Committee must make sure the city follows through on our recommendations throughout the phases, as well as continue to bring new recommendations to the council. Like any committee, members will come and go, and in that organic process, it brings new voices to the table. Community committees like these are extremely important. They're the eyes on the street. I believe it is the time well spent with the city planner and a group of community members working on behalf of all of Beacon. I am looking towards the future of this city, and I hope that the Main Street Access Committee continues to work for progress and not just become a name in the files. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So of those who signed up, there are no other sign-ups for a general public comment. If you'd like to make a general public comment, not on the hearing on electrification, this would be the time to do so. For instance, if any of the members of the Main Street Access Committee wanted to speak, this would be the appropriate time for that topic. Of course, tell us your name and where you live, Pam.
Pam Weatherby, 66 Mead Avenue. I was a member of the Main Street Access Committee, and Teresa mentioned one of the areas that we didn't really talk about was the handicap accessibility. But for me, it's not just Main Street, it's throughout this whole city that we have to look at handicap accessibility. And also, I'm concerned, and we touched on it on Main Street Access Committee, but e-bikes. You know, they're great in this city. I think they work very well because we're pretty flat, but they're dangerous for pedestrians, and we have to look at now and in our future that I feel e-bikes are going to be more throughout the city, and especially with, future rail trail, we have to be ahead of that and look towards seeing how we can incorporate the safety for all citizens, the handicapped citizens, and allow the e-bikes to freely go throughout the city, but safety has to be thought of first. So, thank you.
Thank you. Sure.
Hello, my name's Ron D'Onofrio. I'm a Beacon resident, and for the sake of time and weather, I printed out some of the things that I've sent to you all, but it's been revised, so I will leave these for you. And just go over a couple of points, reiterating what's been discussed already. Restructuring of the Main Street Access Committee, we think, is a great thing to do. We also think that Main Street communication needs to be revised, where we can have some digital signage and things that are going on in the city, and/or government events or things that are going on. ADA compliance. We feel that this not only been not a focus, but there needs to be some enforcement and make that a reality. Increase Main Street refuse pickup. It's a little tidbit of mine. From Sunday to Tuesday, there's a lot of garbage on Main Street that's not picked up, and I think we could do a simple plan with the businesses in the area. Another one of mine is bike racks. I believe that some of the bump out areas and the yellow striping could be used for putting bike racks. Now, there might be e-bikes or other bikes, but it'll take them off the sidewalk, and it's a great way of reusing that space again. Plus, it'll prevent trucks from parking there, cars from parking there, leaving their cars running while they run out real quickly because it's a no parking zone. So I've sent that to a bunch of you guys, pictures of that when it happens and videos, and it just continually happens. It happened on my way here tonight. Pedestrian stop signs. I really think that they could be enhanced with some blinking lights like our neighbors have in Wappingers and in Fishkill. So I think that's an imperative, because they're not really being paid attention to when people are trying to cross the street. If they had some blinking lights that a pedestrian can push, I think that cars will stop, because they're really getting that visual literacy to stop. Parking on Main, well, that's been talked about enough tonight, and I think there's things that we can all do. And I would like to see all season Main Street sidewalks being taken care of, whether it be the city's responsibility or a joint situation with businesses, where the snow is shoveled, the ice is gone, and a beautification system during, the regular time periods. So that's really it, and I hope it doesn't snow too bad tonight. And thank you for everything you guys do and for listening to us. And I'd like to leave these with somebody. So.
Thank you. Okay, any other final public comments before we open up the hearing? Ben, anyone online want to make a public comment other than for the hearing on electrification?
If you're on Zoom and you'd like to make a public comment, please use the raise hand option at the bottom of your screen. If you're joining us by phone, you can press *9, and you will need to press *6 to unmute once called upon. If you're watching on YouTube, you will need to join the Zoom by visiting beaconny.gov. And right now we have no hands raised for general. We have one hand raised for general comment. That's Connor Gillis.
Yeah, sorry, that was an accident. I want to speak for the public hearing. My apologies.
Okay. No other hands.
Okay. Fine. So now we're on to public hearings, and I will look for a motion and a second to adjourn the public hearing regarding the pilot agreement for Tompkins Terrace, and that would be to adjourn for 2 weeks.
Motion to adjourn the Tompkins pilot hearing until March 13th.
Second. Okay. And then just for rationale, we're not ready to go. So we had to set a public hearing date before we knew all the pieces were in place, and we're still not quite ready. So we'll adjourn it to the 13th, and we'll have to renotice it, which is what you got to do. Any other discussion on that?
Mayor, just that we will have on the March 6th agenda a discussion, because we hope to have a draft document by then.
All right, so that would be for workshop.
Correct.
Got it. All right, everyone okay on that? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay. So I'll take a motion in a second to open the public hearing on a proposed local law number 1 to require electrification of residential and commercial buildings. Motion?
Second.
That's Dan and Ren, was it? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, so let me just provide an intro before we get started. We have a good crowd, I bet, both online and in person. So I just want to note before I hand it over to Drew to explain what's in the draft law that we've got on the table, is that a few years ago, New York State adopted probably the most aggressive greenhouse gas and climate change goals in the country. Not sure whether they're ahead of California, but they're up there with California. At the same time, the state did a new energy efficient building code and set up a program to allow communities to adopt that new code, which was much more energy efficient, earlier in what they called a stretch code program. Beacon was the first city after New York City to adopt the stretch code, basically taking efficiency standards up ahead a couple of years. And at the same time, not this council, but the prior council passed a resolution when we saw the New York State climate goals and their aggressive goals that they had, that Beacon would endeavor to achieve those state goals sooner than the state's deadlines. And that was adopted unanimously by the city. Since then, the city's energy footprint, meaning not all of the community, but the municipal government's footprint, has gone 100% electric. Do I got that right?
Yes.
Some of it has to
Well,
be bought.
100% renewable on
Renewable.
electric.
Got it.
We still do use some fossil fuels in the wastewater and water plants.
Got it. So we've been looking to do things sooner. The interesting thing occurred in December when New York State came out with their 445-page document on how they were going to achieve their greenhouse gas goals on the time frame that they had in mind, and laid out a detailed roadmap on how that's done. In those new goals, new construction is scheduled for the state to go all electric for residential 3 stories and under in 2025. And then for new construction, commercial 3 stories and under, I believe, is 2028. We had discussions with NYSERDA about how the city could be a role model for other communities, and the encouragement was to do a program akin to the stretch energy code that the state did, and that is also considering doing for their achievement of their aggressive greenhouse gas goals. So the design of this proposal follows the state's program and picks earlier dates for new construction, akin to what was done in the energy code. So I just wanted to offer that up as to an explanation of what the history is for the state, where the city has been, what its goals are, and what's going on in this draft. At this point, Drew, is that a decent handoff to you to explain what's in this?
Yeah, that's perfect, Mayor. Thank you very much.
Okay.
So I just want to start off by saying what this law is a supplemental energy conservation code. Under Section 11-109 of the New York State Energy Conservation Code, local municipalities are allowed to adopt more stringent local energy conservation codes. And so that's what we're doing here. Under this legislation, we have set forth exemptions. As the mayor said, our goal is to, after speaking with NYSERDA, is really to mimic what the governor has proposed, but set forth earlier dates for all electric building requirements. So the exemptions are the exact same exemptions that you will find in the governor's proposal. Taking one step backwards, in the agenda packet, there is a version of the local law with track changes on. That just is to help everybody understand how this law has evolved from when it first was discussed by the city council to what it is proposed now. And this is after our calls with NYSERDA, after further workshops with the city council. And so that's what the red line edits mean. We then added several definitions to help guide the enforcement of this. You know, those definitions include clarifying all electric ready. What does that mean? Putting forth definitions for major renovations, which right now, a major renovation is described as any construction or renovation to an existing structure other than a repair or addition where the work area exceeds 75% of the heated floor area and involves the replacement of new installation of a heating or hot water system. The main goal of this legislation is to require that effective on January 1st, 2024, no building permit application will be accepted by the building department or issued by the building department for new construction, major renovations to residential, commercial, and mixed use. Originally, we set forth two separate goals, one for residential to be January 1st, 2024, and one for commercial that would be a couple years after that. Under this law, residential and commercial are now going to be regulated the same, and all electric requirements will happen January 1st, 2024. Another thing we did is to address the concern that there might be a loophole with respect to the major renovation definition. We added a provision that any heating or hot water system that is replaced within 5 years after a renovation involving 75% or more of the heated floor area, that must be all electric, those installations. We understood that this might not be feasible for everybody. So this legislation also includes a hardship exemption, where an applicant would go to the Zoning Board of Appeals to present their hardship arguments, and the Zoning Board of Appeals would consider whether there is a reason to grant such an exception. And so we tried to make the law as straightforward as we could while still achieving the goals of the city and the city's initiatives.
Okay. Thank you, Drew. So we can open up the public hearing. Again, I think, and I could be wrong, but it looks to me like there's a sizable number of people who'd like to speak. So my only request would be come state your name, what you want to discuss. Try to keep it brief. And if you've discovered that others are saying the same thing, you might just want to shorten it down further. All right, and that'll give everyone an opportunity to talk. And we'll start with John. Is it Rath? Yes, sir. Okay. Tell us your name and where you live.
My name is John Rath. I live in Poughkeepsie. Mayor, council people, city staff, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I am the Director of Operations for the New York Geothermal Energy Organization, New York Geo for short. And our members are all over the state making the electrification movement happen. So these guys are, and men and women in our membership ranks are out putting in geothermal heat pumps and electrifying as many buildings as they can, and I can tell you that they are very, very busy, so the market is reacting. I want to do two things today. One is I want to just say thank you and convey my appreciation and my admiration for your progressiveness. Prior to this, I knew about your progressive composting program, which a few of us in Poughkeepsie are trying to duplicate, and we've used your game plan and your reports to try and get something started there, hoping that it'll even be close to yours. So I want to thank you very much, because usually new, innovative, progressive programs like this take some arrows and take some complaints. But I remember back in 2019 when there was a moratorium in Westchester and on gas, and people said, you're going to kill us, our economy will get crushed, and today Westchester is thriving. In fact, as a couple of examples, one of our members is Dandelion Energy, who you may have heard of, and they tell me that they have installed hundreds, literally hundreds, of electrified buildings, residences mostly, for Dandelion in Westchester County. and at a significant savings for the owner, and with a reasonable 6 to 7 year payback. I also want to let you know I appreciate and I think it's a wise decision to combine the same timeline for commercial and for residential. So I'd like to share some successes with you from other members across the state where commercial and residential mixed use use of electrification has worked out very, very well. And just a couple examples. Here in the Hudson Valley, you can go to Terrytown and you can see examples of it. You can go to Greenberg, where another one of our members is installing a system. Poughkeepsie's got 3 on the docket right now, including what you may have heard of as a thermal energy network program that's now a legislative act, whereby 40 homes or residences or buildings are planned by Central Hudson in a pilot program to be electrified. And that also includes the youth center, the Youth Opportunity Union Center that was the old YMCA. So it's being proven all over the place. I wish we could be out front like you guys are. You're up there with Berkeley and Ithaca and parts of Boston and other parts of California, just being really progressive and out front of everybody else. In addition to the ones I mentioned, if you're wondering about electrification and high-rise buildings, mixed-use buildings, there's New York City has One Java in Greenpoint, 1515 Surf Avenue in Coney Island. Oasis LIC is a commercial building that's all geothermal. In Buffalo, we've got the historic Pierce Arrow building. We've got the Consolidated Business International in Niagara Falls. I'm going to get this right. Synchronet headquarters, which is a data center, is also in Buffalo, all electrified. And as I mentioned in Poughkeepsie, we're going to have the youth center, hopefully, if that pilot program works out. So the 2 things, one, to congratulate you and thank you. The second is to just let you know that it's happening, and appreciate you guys being out front with this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Martin Fowler.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council, City Administrator. My name is Martin Fowler, and I live in Ward 3 here in Beacon. I'm going to try and speak as quickly as I can here. I'm here today to speak as a member of Beacon Climate Action Now in staunch support of the gas-free new buildings bill. As I've spoken about here in the past on this issue, climate change has affected my family deeply and swiftly, including members of my family who have lost homes to rampant wildfires in recent years, directly resulting from the changing climate. With climate change fully present and the weather getting weirder all the time, with a long fall spring here in the Hudson Valley and snow falling instead in the southern part of my home state of California, where it hasn't in almost a century, we need strong, bold climate solutions now. I'd like to speak now on a few specifics of the bill text as drafted from the city's agenda packet for tonight's meeting. I want to thank you for including all building types, including mixed use and commercial, on the accelerated timeline. That is excellent, and it is as it should be. Next, at least in this current draft of the bill, I'd like to thank you for not including open-ended manufacturing exemptions, although I'm not entirely sure that wasn't an error based on last week's discussion, or perhaps I've misread or missed a portion of the bill text. Anyway, regardless, based on that discussion last week, I hope you will consider the message that including open-ended exemptions sends. It would be this council stating that we will continue to populate our community with businesses that specifically require fossil fuel combustion and creating more carbon emissions potentially for generations, something the IPCC has outlined very clearly we cannot afford to do. I do not think that removing exclusions for manufacturing is anti-business as it has been framed in previous discussion. Instead, I think it positions Beacon as a positive environment for businesses that want to build a beautiful future with us and see the value that this community holds in sending that message. I would be proud to be part of that future community. Next, I want to address potential issues with specifics from the current draft in the text itself, including the definitions of heated floor area and major renovation. The definition of heated floor area in the draft reads, spaces are indirectly heated where they connect through openings with heated spaces, where they are separated from heated spaces by uninsulated walls, floors, or ceilings. The word indirectly opens up some significant loopholes. Take, for example, a previous house I had rented, which was a single-family ranch-style home with a full basement that matched the footprint of the house. By this definition, the entire basement would be included in the heated floor plan, as the space between the basement and the main floor was not insulated, meaning that if the entire main floor of the house got renovated, it would only come to include 50% of the heated floor space, which would not subject it to this law as I currently understand it. I would like to see that loophole closed, ideally by reducing the heated floor plan space to 50%. Second, I want to address two issues I have with section 106-34, paragraph B, which reads, any heating or hot water system replaced or installed within 5 years after the issuance of any building permit to construct or renovate an existing structure involving 75% or more of the heated floor area, other than a repair or addition, shall be electric. A 5-year limitation phrased in this way means anyone can simply leapfrog between renovations and installation of new fossil fuel infrastructure at the end of life of an existing appliance, as long as it's outside of that 5-year window. I would like to see the words within 5 years and thus the term removed. On the qualification of repairs, since any repair requiring 75% or more of the heated floor area is ostensibly the same as a gut renovation, I think it ought to be subject to this law. Similarly, on the qualification of additions, I see no reason why expansions of a home and or ADUs should not be subject to this law as well. As such, I'd also like to see the words, I would like to see the words other than a repair or addition removed from this paragraph as well. Finally, a few small questions and notes on the draft. I'm not incredibly familiar with manufactured homes, and so I'd like some further clarification on the specific exemption and why it's included. Perhaps I missed that at some point. My understanding, number two, my understanding based on discussion was that crematorium was likely to be removed, and I would like to see it as such. New York State also recently legalized human composting, a much healthier and more natural alternative to the last century's fad of cremating, and I know the city is a big fan of composting. I want to deeply commend the role of the city, the role the city of Beacon is playing in establishing the groundwork for requiring major renovations to be fossil fuel free, as well as ramping up the timeline for all new buildings in a way that
15 seconds.
the immediacy of this issue. I would like to see you continue to refine this bill to be as strong as possible while aiming for a swift passage. Thank you so much for responding to the voices of so many in our community who have asked Beacon to be a leader on this issue and to electrify new buildings now. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Brian Mundell.
I would just like to ask no one to leave bodies in our compost system right now. I mean, we might get there someday, but
Yeah.
let's go easy, folks.
Hi, my name is Brian Mandel. I am a resident of Ward 3. I'm also a member of Beacon Climate Action Now. I just want to start by thanking you all for taking the time and your attention on what I consider a very important issue. It really fills me with a lot of pride to be living in a city and a community that's prioritizing something like this. As our friend here mentioned, this is a huge deal, both in the immediate community and also nationwide. I see this as an investment in the future of this community. We live in a time where we all have to kind of rise to meet the moment and do our part to leave a world better than we found it. And as this is an investment in our community, I think a stronger piece of legislation is a stronger investment and a larger investment in that future. So I do want to just briefly comment on what I see as a bit of a dangerous dynamic in sometimes talking about these issues and some issues that came up when you were discussing this last week, which is kind of this dichotomy between economic development and green initiatives. I find that to be a false choice and a dangerous way of looking at this. We have an opportunity to be a leader in this state and in this country, and we should be focusing on what sort of opportunities this will allow us rather than the opportunities that it will deny us. There are new businesses and new types of businesses that are going to be springing up. The economics of how we travel, of how we heat and cool our homes, and just generally how we do business is going to undergo a major change over the course of the next decade. This bill And the strongest version of this bill will put Beacon at the forefront of that movement. We can attract new types of businesses and new types of economic development, industries that we might not even be aware of right now, who are going to be looking to see what Beacon's doing and look at a place for us to do business. So I want to thank you again and urge you guys to pass the most robust version of this bill that you can. Thank you for your time.
Julie Winterbottom?
Good evening. My name is Julie Winterbottom, and I live in Ward 1. I crossed out about half of what I had to say, knowing that there's a fair amount of repetition here. I just want to say I really appreciate the work you have all done on this gas-free buildings bill. It's a great step towards reducing carbon emissions, and I'm very glad that you put commercial on the same timeline as residential. But I would urge you to make it even stronger. Specifically, I too would like to see a more precise and impactful definition of major renovation. As it is currently written, the definition will only apply if a renovation includes the replacement or installation of a furnace or boiler and the work area exceeds 75% of the heated floor area. My concern is that this means that the heating systems mentioned there, as well as all other gas appliances, can be replaced or added as long as they're not part of a gut renovation. Given the lifespan of some of these appliances and heating systems, this means that people could be locking into as many as 30 years of continued dependence on fossil fuels, which goes against Beacon's and the state's climate goals, needlessly exposes residents to the well-documented health risks of gas appliances in the home. It also fails to take advantage of the fact that money is available from New York State and the federal government to offset the initial cost of switching to electric appliances. So I urge you to continue discussing this part of the bill, consider replacing "and" with "or" in this definition of major renovation, and including all gas appliances in the list. I urge you to pass the strongest bill possible. Not only will it reduce our town's greenhouse gas emissions, it could have a profound ripple effect by inspiring other towns and the state to follow suit. Thank you.
Thank you. Arthur Kamens.
Good evening, everyone. Arthur Kamens. I'm in Ward 2. I'll try to be brief. I want to support the cautions, both the support, strong support for working on this law, and appreciate everything you've done. A couple of concerns. One, getting back to the issue of major renovations. One example I thought of, let's say a landlord decides to renovate all of the kitchens in his building. May or may not be replacing the heating system, but it seems to me that in that kind of situation, they ought to be required to go electric, and I hope that part of it can be considered. The other issue, I'm not exactly sure what to do about it, because I understand that there might be some need for a hardship exemption. However, my experience listening to hardship claims by developers in front of the zoning board is that they pretty much get away with making a claim about what they can't afford, and they get to do whatever they want. And I'm concerned that that kind of claim could happen again, and so there needs to be some kind of a check on that, so that, you know, we get what we want out of the law. The third thing had to do with the issue of manufactured homes. Now, again, as someone mentioned, I'm not familiar. I mean, I know what a manufactured home is, but I'm not clear why that should be an exemption. I don't know why a manufactured home couldn't be all electric. And so I don't know the reason that was put in there, either in the state law or whether Beacon Wyatt decided to put that in there, but I urge you to give that some consideration. Overall, I'm pleased with this, and I'm confident that you'll pass the strongest law possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Bill Irwin.
Bill Irwin, South Avenue. Thank you all for all the work you do. We got an email. I work with Beacon Climate Action now. We got an email from a gentleman in Massachusetts who apparently has family in Beacon. He heard about this bill, and he sent this email. I'm a residential home builder in northeastern Massachusetts. Since the technology for heat pumps has advanced in the past several years, we are now comfortable recommending them for our custom home clients. This system has the added benefit of cooling built into the same system, which is all the more important in our warming climate. These homeowners gain a healthier air quality and help reduce our dependence on a way of life that is doing more harm to us in the short, medium, and long term. When I asked my latest customers who happen to live across the street from me if they wanted to install heat pumps instead of gas or oil-fired boiler, they at first said, "We don't want to be pioneers, we just want to have a warm house." When they realized they were in good company with many people who use heat pumps in our wintry climate in Massachusetts, they agreed to install them in their new home. On a recent night, when temperatures reached negative 11 degrees Fahrenheit, they were perfectly comfortable and are now fully confident in their system. I expect that every Beacon resident who forgoes a gas hookup in their new home will be comfortable, probably more so due to the air quality and health benefits, efficiency gains, and ultimate cost savings. I would encourage Beacon to join the communities in my area and around the country that are moving in this same direction and to provide a strong model for others to adopt. That's the end of his statement, and I'm glad to hear that so many people are having good experiences with heat pumps. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Katie, is it Spiker?
Hi, my name is Katie Spiker, and I'm a Ward 3 resident of Beacon and a member of Beacon Climate Action Now. I'm here today to support the Gas 3 Buildings bill that would make Beacon a national leader in addressing the climate crisis. As a farmer, I see tangible effects of climate change in my work that feeds our community and is my sole source of income. In 2018, 8 states along the East Coast had the wettest year on record, with New York receiving 15 more inches of rain than is typical. In 2020, while I was farming in Virginia, we had a frost in the 3rd week of May, 3 weeks after the last frost date, which killed all of the fruit tree blossoms, wiping out an entire year's worth of crops. In 2021, the Hudson Valley experienced 4 hurricane or tropical storm events within a 4-week period, each producing 5 or more inches of rain, causing flooding that ended our tomato crop a month early. And this past year, 2022, was one of the driest years this region has ever seen. My farm did not receive rainfall from the summer solstice at the end of June until Labor Day at the beginning of September, 2 full months without rain. In just 1 week, farmers from across the nation will be convening in DC to urge our federal lawmakers to make climate change a priority. While we still have a long way to go federally, locally we have the opportunity to make major strides, and Beacon has the chance to become a national leader in addressing the climate change crisis. I urge all of you to pass the strongest version of the gas-free buildings bill, banning gas hookups in all new construction by 2024, including residential and commercial construction. This bill is a vital step towards addressing the climate crisis, and I applaud you all for moving forward with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Nick Gurton.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Nick Gurton. I'm a resident of Ward 1. I'd like to support the measures that are being discussed here tonight regarding electrification in new residential and commercial buildings. In addition to offering my voice in support for this as a resident, I'd also like to offer my perspective as somebody whose work on a day-to-day basis touches these measures. Throughout my professional career, I've been working in the design and construction of buildings. I've previously worked in architectural practice on affordable housing, community facilities, and commercial buildings. I've served in the public sector as a city planner and I currently work with a community-based real estate development nonprofit. In each of those roles, I've interrogated the role that design and construction can play in addressing climate change and environmental justice. The U.S. Energy Information Administration reports that residential and commercial sectors accounted for 28% of the total energy consumed in the U.S. in 2021. The EIA also reports that nearly 2/3 of energy consumed in buildings comes from heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems, lighting systems, and major appliances. By requiring electrification for new construction as proposed here, the city is playing an important role in curbing greenhouse gas emissions, and in doing so, Beacon can help tackle the part that fossil fuels play in driving climate change. I'm submitting my support to stress for 2 additional reasons. First, that we are able to move up the timeline substantially in adopting these measures ahead of statewide minimum requirements. And second, that the council has worked hard to identify multiple areas of opportunity that achieve impact here in the short term. I've observed how these measures evolve over time, and I believe they represent tangible progress across a number of these focus areas under discussion. The time for action is now, and I urge adoption of this proposal. I believe it represents benefits that can be realized in short order, and it's a strong foundation upon which future action can and should be taken as we all grapple with the work necessary in these urgent times. Thank you.
Thank you. Jane Durand.
Good evening. My name is Jane Durand. I live in Ward 1, and I'm a member of Beacon Climate Action Now. I'm here tonight to express my strong support for the Beacon City Council to pass the gas-free new buildings bill. The law that's been drafted clearly acknowledges the significant health, environmental, and cost-saving benefits of eliminating natural gas from our indoor environments. And I'm proud to live in a city that strives to be a leader in climate change mitigation and the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. And the changes we're talking about here tonight aren't going to only have a positive impact on future generations, they'll also improve the lives of our community members in the here and now, which is very exciting. That's why I urge you to pass a gas-free buildings bill that bans burning fossil fuel indoors in all new buildings, including all major renovations. And I do echo what has already been said tonight about strengthening that definition. Many I've spoken with about this policy in Beacon have been extremely supportive, so I hope you'll be able to announce very soon that their voices have been heard by passing this bill. Thank you very much to the mayor and the council members for your leadership and for your time tonight.
Thank you. Jesse Van Amberg.
Hi, good evening. My name is Jessie Van Amberg, and I am a resident of Ward 4. I'm here tonight to speak again in support of the gas-free buildings legislation currently being considered by the council. I used to feel really hopeless about the state of the climate emergency. It was frustrating and demoralizing seeing our federal elected officials continue to kick the can down the road or even outright deny that there was any issue at all. The problem is so big and so complex that I and many other people I know have long felt like there's nothing I can do as a person to make any kind of meaningful change. But joining Beacon Climate Action Now and working on this campaign to prevent new fossil fuel infrastructure in our town has really helped me see how powerful collective action is. This campaign started in a friend's backyard and transformed into pounding the pavements to collect signatures, talking with community members at the farmers market and other local events, hosting an event of our own to get the word out, and showing up to City Hall to talk to you all several times about how important it is to make all of our city's new buildings gas-free as soon as possible. It gives me so much hope to stand here before you now, 7 months after BCAN was formed, as you consider a bill that, in its current form, is one of the boldest pieces of municipal electrification legislation in this country. I am so proud to be a member of BCAN and a member of this community, and I thank our champions on the City Council, Dan and Paloma, for helping us get this far. Tonight, I urge you to pass a gas-free buildings bill that bans burning fossil fuel indoors in all new buildings, including commercial renovations starting in 2024, including gas stove replacements, and including renovations that affect 75% of a building. The existing draft is a great bill, but there are some things that we can do to give this legislation more power to protect our community and curb the worst effects of climate change. Many other folks who have spoken tonight have already raised those issues, so I will give a brief version of just something I haven't heard yet, which is I think we should take away the arbitrary 5-year limit on renovations. If we don't want people who are renovating their homes to install new or replacement gas appliances now because of the harm they do to the health and environment, then why should it be okay for them to do it in 5 years? I think we should just have a moratorium once that threshold is hit. The existing bill also makes some carve-outs for certain commercial industries with the intention of protecting and supporting businesses. But I would argue that it's not bad business to electrify, nor is it anti-business to ask people to do so if they want to come to our city and benefit from the people who live and visit here. I encourage the council to revisit these exemptions and see which ones are really necessary and be skeptical about adding a broad manufacturing exemption without a clear definition of it or a rationale for its inclusion. Otherwise, bad actors can take advantage of these loopholes and bring toxic fossil fuels into our community. I'm grateful to live in Beacon, where our elected officials truly do listen to the concerns of the community, which is how we've gotten so far on this bill in the first place. The time is ripe to make the final improvements to this bill and sign it into law. This legislation is a huge victory for our community's health and well-being for decades to come. And Beacon is truly leading by example, joining Ithaca and New York City and hopefully inspiring the state to pass its own version. I urge the council to take action now and make history with this powerful bill. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Emily Skydell?
Thank you so much for holding this hearing. I'm pretty short, so I have to pull this down. My name's Emily Skydell. I'm the Hudson Valley Senior Organizer with Food and Water Watch. I wrote down some stuff, and I think Jesse really covered a lot of it. But it's something that I think she landed on at the end is what I wanted to touch on just one more time. For one, I'm incredibly supportive of this bill. I think it's so amazing, and I'd like to thank the City Council and especially BCAN for the work that they did to really galvanize the community around this important legislation. But there was a little bit of reference to Governor Hochul's proposal, and I just want to really underscore the fact that the state has not passed this yet. The governor has simply proposed something similar to this, and that when Beacon passes this bill, it's going to make a huge impact on the state passing this bill. So we often think about the power of the state over the city, but really in this instance, the city has a lot of power to influence the state. And I really want to thank Beacon for stepping up and being a leader and pushing the boundaries of what's possible, because this issue is so urgent and necessary and important, and we've just been kicking the can down the road. So I really, really thank you for doing this, and I'm just here to show my support, so thank you all so much.
Teresa Kraft.
Hi. Gonna lose a lot of friends tonight. I urge the city to put the brakes on its rush to be the first in the county to require the electrification of residential and commercial buildings. The ban being pushed across the country in 8 states and New York has nothing to do with dangerous gas stoves or heating systems, when in fact it's based on the fear of the country that they need the natural gas to supply the grid emergency backup generators. Problem is, banning the direct use of natural gas by the end users lowers energy efficiency when accounting for the full fuel cycle. It also may increase carbon emissions if utilities continue to rely on natural gas and other fossil fuels in the electricity generation. Even if a natural gas ban has a detectable effect on climate change, our local municipality implementing it would receive a trivial share of the global benefits. A ban could look good politically on paper, but it will not solve the world crisis. Please do not permanently promote electrification or phase out natural gas. I have walked the Earth Day talk since the words were first hand-drawn on our t-shirts, but I can't jump on this bandwagon as it's just another political tactic. Many in this room may not even know that the Jewel of Beacon, the Howland Cultural Center, has had a geothermal system for 16 years, and the maintenance and upkeep is not cheap. I'm concerned that most small lot residents do not have adequate land to install the ground penetrating pipe systems that sound so great, nor the large funds to install them. This band, I ask you, please do not pass this so quickly. Sit on it for a little while. You don't have to be first. Everybody thinks how great Beacon is, but this is not the way to go. Thank you.
Thank you. Sergey Krasikov.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, City Council, City Administrator, Sergey Krasikov, 386 Liberty Street, Ward 3. The climate change is here. Our clock is ticking louder and louder. CLCPA is very clear. Electrifying our buildings is a major part of the puzzle. And by 2030, more than 200,000 homes need to be electrified every year in the state to meet the goals. For Beacon, it means around 1,000 buildings need to be converted to all electric by 2035, and then 200 buildings or more going forward. So electrifying new construction is a meaningful first step, but a much bigger task lies ahead of us to electrify the existing housing stock on a meaningful timeline. But I do applaud you for bringing this law to life. I do want to circle back to loopholes that we discussed, you discussed at the workshop. About 75% of heated area being renovated, and then potentially somebody deciding not to replace their old burner and then deciding to replace it a little bit later. So 5-year or no limit might be a reasonable solution, but I think we need to think about a guardrail. In a situation like this, somebody does this, they renovate, they don't replace, they sell the home, a new person buys the home, lives in it as if like normal, like we all did at some point when we purchased our houses, and then your furnace goes down. And you go to the building department to get a permit, and you are told, excuse me, you need to electrify your building. And instead of $3,000 a weekend or a day job in your basement, suddenly it's $15,000, $20,000 job. That's super disruptive in your house, to install air ducts or runs for the heat pumps in the existing home. I think that I ask you to think about a potential disclaimer that would have to be attached to a property when it goes on sale, so that the potential homeowner knows that this condition exists and this house will be subject to this rule that any future replacement would have to be electric. And potentially this would allow them to negotiate a lower purchasing price because the house will carry liability of an expensive repair on a pinch. And for many families it can be a devastating expense, and if it happens in the middle of the winter, like you kind of out of luck, you can replace your boiler within a day, but it will take weeks to schedule and install all electric heating system. I also have concern about the hardship exemption. It will be good to have a clear metric attached to it. Some of the exemptions, as was mentioned here earlier, they did seem to be quite unsubstantiated, and some developers seem to get away. Manufactured homes. I have worked many years ago in a construction company that installed manufactured homes. They were pre-built on a factory, brought to site, and we told them what exactly we needed. It would be electric cook stove, it would be gas cook stove, there will be this type of heating system, and they pre-installed what they could, and then the building was brought on site, and then the rest was done on site. I don't see why it cannot be prepared for all electric. This exemption seems, I don't understand the logic of it. It probably was picked up from a state law, but I think that's something we should look into, and I don't think there is any reason for it from my experience of witnessing how these houses were built together at the factories. So thank you again. Have a good night.
Thank you. Is it Tara Ramos? Or
Hi, my name is Tara Vamos. I'm from Cold Spring, but I'm also a member of BCAN and a member of Food and Water Action. And I wanted to thank you for taking this bill up and hopefully passing it. I agree with many of the former commenters on please put some guardrails on the hardship exemption. Please keep the 2024 timeline for commercial and residential, and also that the manufactured homes exemption seems confusing to me, because that's one of the easiest ways to get an all-electric building. I just wanted to contextualize this a little bit in terms of what you are doing right now for neighbors, like neighboring communities in New York State. There are compressor station expansions proposed for Athens and Dover, New York. The reason why the pipeline companies are saying they need to expand is they say, well, there's going to be increases in gas usage. We predict, based on how much gas has been used in the past, that the amount of gas being used in all of New York State will continue to go up, so we need to put in expansions on compressor stations. One of those is next to I think it's a high school. The way to stop using gas is to stop using it. And we have a better way of doing things now, so stopping allowing it in new buildings is crucial, the right thing to do. And I really thank you for taking this law up and hopefully passing it. And I hope it will be the thing that turns the key for all of New York State to say, okay, we'll do it. New York City did it, Beacon did it, Ithaca did it. We can just do it across the board. So thank you all.
Thank you. That's everyone on the list. Is there someone in the public arena here who would like to speak? Again, I would just ask that you keep your remarks to those that haven't been repeated before, and come on up.
Good evening, Thomas Wright, 24 Grove Street. I would like to voice my strong support for the electrification legislation being considered in the public hearing. I'm very excited that the legislation is doing away with the delay for commercial projects. Starting residential and commercial at the same time sends a strong message to other communities and the state that residential and commercial electrification can and should be regulated quickly. One point about gut renovations: adding the clause that requires those who have previously engaged in gut renovations replace their heating system with electric equipment if they do so in the future makes sense. However, please remove the 5-year window. Those projects that meet the gut renovation threshold should be compelled to electrify, whether they do it a year or 10 years after the project is complete. Please also consider broadening the clause to include all gas infrastructure. In other words, when new heating equipment is installed at some point after a gut renovation, it must be electric, and the remaining gas infrastructure must be disabled, so that the legislation can capture water heaters, dryers, and ranges. The goal is no new gas combusting equipment. These minor revisions to the gut renovations clause will ensure that goal is achieved. The fact that you have acted quickly and carefully on this legislation is really impressive and deserves recognition and gratitude from the community. The discussions have been thorough and have resulted in legislation that sets a high bar for building construction standards. You should be proud of the fact that with these standards, you are saying new construction will not use fossil fuel combusting equipment, and you are saying there is a better way. Electrification will make our buildings healthier, safer, and less costly to run. I'm proud of the fact that you have decided not only to engage with the targets and timelines stipulated by the CLCPA, but with this legislation, you will be acting more quickly than the state and providing leadership and concrete examples of how to address the climate crisis head on, and I thank you for that.
Thanks. Anyone else? And then we have the remote as well, so we need to get to those as well.
We have 3 on remote right now.
Got 3.
Good evening, City Council. My name is Greg Zuman. I'm a resident and homestead owner-operator based on the east side of Beacon. I appreciate the concerns of fans of this bill. At my Beacon homestead, I made best efforts during my rehabilitation of the site and the home a few years ago to forego fossils, period, full stop, as in zero petroleum, coal, and toxic methane materials, fuels, and systems. Almost exclusively non-toxic materials are featured in the physical plant. And I'd happily support a complete ban on petroleum in Beacon, for instance. My primary heating, cooking, fuel, and materials source is the most accessible resource in and around Beacon, and that is wood. Mandating electrical for all fuel purposes enslaves all of Beacon. Efficient use of wood is the obvious choice for many of us on so many fronts, as it has been since time immemorial. Another great fuel is alcohol, which is produced locally. Can be produced locally, is produced locally. We have a bunch of dams blocking all of our fisheries all throughout Beacon. Where are the incentives to get these erstwhile electrical producers fired up again? Electrical fails. Who pays for the plumbing repairs when the grid goes down? What constitutes mandatory backup systems for electrical systems in the proposed law? Why ban wood fuel at home? NYSERDA offers great incentives for wood furnace installations, for instance. EPA certifies extraordinarily efficient wood burning stoves as well. By the way, I operate a 3-story human manure deposit and composting system at home, and I'm accepting new deposits if anyone's interested. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Okay, we ready to go to online? You got one more? Sure, come on up.
Hi, my name is Nicolette Dakin. I live in Beacon Hills. Although my home is technically beyond the city boundaries, I very much consider Beacon to be my home. I want to first thank you all for prioritizing this issue, and I encourage you to pass a gas-free new buildings bill that eliminates indoor fossil fuels in all commercial and residential buildings, major renovations, and appliance replacements starting in 2024. I also encourage very clear and specific grounds for the hardship exemption and to dispense of the exemption for manufactured homes. I speak to you today not as a constituent, but as a prospective homeowner. I'm currently finishing graduate school, so while money is tight at the moment, I hope to be able to purchase a home in the very near future. It is precisely because of Beacon's leadership on climate that I feel so confident about wanting to purchase a home and raise a family in Beacon. I want to raise my children somewhere where I trust the air is clean, in a home where we're not exposed to dangerous pollutants, and in a city where I trust the government to prioritize our well-being and the well-being of the planet. When a city passes legislation like this, it signals to me that this is a community I can trust with my future. As others mentioned, I want to emphasize that we are not asking you to choose between business and climate. We know that all electric buildings are ultimately more cost efficient than mixed fuel buildings. Secondly, we want businesses in Beacon that are going to be here for the long haul. Businesses that understand why this is a unique place and want to integrate in this community and share our values. Like me, such businesses are going to see that Beacon's leadership on climate is a major asset and a reason to put down roots here, not to stay away. Lastly, I want to emphasize something from my own area of study. I study the social psychology of climate change, and one thing we have documented repeatedly is that 80 to 90% of Americans underestimate the degree to which there's widespread popular support for policies to mitigate climate change. So for that reason, I just want to remind you that myself and the other members of Beacon Climate Action Now have been out tabling, canvassing, speaking to neighbors, and the support for this bill is undeniable. I urge you to pass the most robust version of this bill, and I want to express my gratitude for the City Council and the Mayor for collaborating with us on this issue and for listening to your constituents' desire for bold, ambitious action on climate. Thank you.
Thanks. So, Ben, who do we got online?
Currently, we have 4 hands raised online, first of which is Philip Stamatis.
Hello, Phil Stamatis, Wilson Street. I'd like to just echo what Arthur Kamen said regarding the manufactured homes, not sure why they're involved. Also, about, excuse me, about the recent homesteader who just spoke. I was also confused about the wood component of the law. I didn't see anything regulated about the wood component of burning, so I'm confused about that. Also, with the 70% gut job, or 75%, I would like to see that number come down to 66%. I don't know if 50% is the right number, but as a current homeowner that recently had their house pretty much completely gutted, I can easily see how a local real estate developer would find a way to stay below that threshold, not to upgrade the heating. Thank you.
Thanks.
Our next Zoom participant is Connor Gillis.
Good evening. My name is Connor Gillis, and I'm here tonight representing the Dutchess County Association of Realtors and to speak on Local Law 1 of 2023. Our members support the commitment that Beacon has made to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and the Council's efforts to address climate change are commendable. As of now, Local Law 1 fails to consider the economic realities faced by Beacon residents and sheds no light on its impact on current and future homeowners and commercial property owners. This law must not only help the city achieve its emission reduction targets, but it must also ensure that energy supply and delivery are affordable and reliable for consumers. In the spring of 2022, the New York State Association of Realtors commissioned a study by the Rosen Consulting Group out of Berkeley, California, to quantify the cost of electrification proposals. The analysis found that single-family homeowners can expect to spend anywhere from $17,000 to $31,000 to retrofit their homes using an air source heat pump. The cost of retrofitting a single-family home using a more efficient ground source heat pump is even higher, ranging from $29,000 to $50,000. The owners of multifamily properties and commercial spaces will also be affected by the proposed law. Small multifamily buildings may be retrofitted with an air or water source heat pump at costs ranging from $13,000 to $30,000 per unit. Retrofit costs for a ground source heat pump range from anywhere between $29,000 and $42,000 per unit. For large multifamily buildings, such as apartments and condominium buildings, overall costs to retrofit range from $19,000 to $42,000 per unit with an air or water source heat pump, and from $40,000 to $56,000 per unit with a ground source heat pump. When looking at the cost of electrifying new construction, the costs are a little more modest as compared to that of retrofits. The costs range anywhere from $12,000 to $23,000, accounting for an air source heat pump, full range of appliances, labor, and infrastructure necessities. The Council's proposal has the potential to make homeownership less affordable for Beacon residents at a time when New York State has the lowest homeownership rate in the country, 54% in 2022, representing a decrease of 3.6% since 2005. A just transition away from fossil fuels must seriously address the impact of electrification policies on homeownership, housing accessibility, and affordability in Beacon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next Zoom speaker is Scott Lehrman.
Thank you. I think I went out to get a cup of yogurt, but I don't think, other than the last speaker, I've heard anyone who's against this. Frankly, the changeover to all-electric new buildings seems to be a no-brainer, and I would hope that we can pass this law and that we'll proceed with it. What I do worry about, and I think it's worth mentioning for those who haven't gone through this process, is that as we move to renovations and ultimately to the transition of existing heating and hot water systems in buildings, a couple of things for everybody to think ahead for. It is, by the way, I live in a historic building in Beacon. It is part of the historic district. It was gut renovated, and we chose to put in heat pump systems, which there are issues with, but seem to be the right thing to do, both for the environment as well as for costs. This building, though, had all of its walls ripped open, which meant that all of the piping could go inside the walls. As a historic structure, it would be inappropriate for us to run those pipes on the outside of the building. as we move forward and as we even look at the retrofit requirements in this bill, that we should consider that, particularly in the historic district, that the burden to do that work means ripping out all the walls in a historic building. It means removing the heating systems that are steam or water radiators. The costs are immense unless you are planning on opening up the walls and replacing the entire heating system. So I do ask that we look at a little bit of a different process as we move to the next stage beyond this bill, which I do think should be passed, which is to how do we make sure that there are subsidies in place to make this affordable for people in Beacon to go through the transition, because we cannot simply say that it would be great if we all had electric homes when most people in Beacon won't be able to afford those changes if they have to retrofit their systems. So let's think it through properly in terms of costs. Let's think about it in a nuanced way. Let's get the majority of things changed that we can change. But I worry about the way this law was developed, which is to bring in a finished bill, to not spend enough time looking at the real issues of the changeover. Again, I actually support this bill, but the next one I think is going to be a lot harder to deal with because it's going to create many challenges for people to make that transition in a way they can afford. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next Zoom speaker is Pete Bailey.
Good evening. I just want to say thank you to the council for being true leaders in the state of New York. I think it's probably not all the time that a municipality of 15,000 people can be a leader on such a global issue. And it's really impressive that you've all taken on this bill. My household switched over to heat pumps about 2 years ago, and it has been a game changer in stabilizing our heating bills. The fluctuations of gas prices are much more blunted when you're using electric and don't have to just rely on the gas. And the power mix is quickly moving towards clean energy in our downstate region, but the only way to take advantage of that is if you have an electric powered home. As long as there are gas pipes that you're using, it doesn't matter if the state fully moves to clean energy, you're still using the gas. So electrification, especially in new buildings, is a huge deal, and I just commend the council for taking this on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next Zoom speaker is Liz Ertner.
Hi, my name is Liz Ertner. I'm a Beacon resident living in Ward 3 and a member of Beacon Climate Action Now. Passing a gas-free new buildings bill is incredibly important to me. It's quite personal to me. I'm the mom of a 3-year-old and a 2-year-old, and I did not take it lightly to decide to have children when there's such an uncertain climate future for all of us. But I really have hope that we can set ourselves on a better path. And I've talked to so many other parents and neighbors about this policy at the playground, at the farmer's market, on my street, and people I've talked to have been incredibly supportive, and it's because the facts are so clear. Gas-free buildings bill will mean less reliance on dirty fossil fuels, cleaner air for kids in our homes, it's cost effective, and as others have mentioned, it's a chance for Beacon to be a leader in the state. Beacon passing a gas-free bill will make way for communities across the state and the country to make similar bold changes, to push for electrification and for more investment in renewable infrastructure, and it's the kind of action we need to make a real impact for the future. This is exactly the kind of thing I want to tell my kids that I'm fighting for on their behalf. And I look forward to all of you making this a reality. I think as those of us can see by the packed room, so many are watching this very closely, and we will see if the bill is watered down and has exceptions that make it less powerful and lets people get around the true purpose. So I'm urging you to not let that happen, and I know I'm only going to be satisfied if the City Council and Mayor are doing everything you can for my family and for all of us in Beacon by making sure the bill includes all new buildings, all major renovations, and all indoor uses, including stoves. So I hope you'll do everything you can to pass the strongest possible version of the bill. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next Zoom speaker is Harry Settleman.
Yes, hi, thank you. I'll keep this short because I don't want to beat a dead horse here. I'm a member of Beacon. I live in Ward 4. I'm a homeowner. I recently had heat pumps put in last year, and I was able to do it because of the state incentives that allowed me to. And also the financing plans helped a lot, the particular company that I went with, which was WK Mechanical, by the way. They're great. I do want to just comment on the upfront cost. It is significant, as has been mentioned by a few people, but the benefit is that in the long term, this saves us a ton of money. And I've actually been pleasantly surprised that even in these, cold, the couple of cold storms we had, we were down to 5 or 0 degrees. They actually worked fine, which I was even surprised about. So I think just to say that the devil is in the details with this. I commend everybody for moving this forwards, and I do think that this should be worked out so that there are ways to make it affordable to most Beacon residents. Thank you.
Thank you.
There are no further speakers on Zoom.
All right, thanks, Ben. There's one here in the public. I'll allow.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Michael Eaton. I am a member of Beacon Climate Action Now and a prospective resident of the city of Beacon. As someone who has both struggled to find hope in the face of the climate crisis while also believing deeply in the potential of humanity, this bill and moment are very important to me. This is a time for us to move towards a better future and show others how. Right now, every state, city, and town needs to start moving away from the use of gas for the health of its citizens and the planet. Developers can't be allowed to continue choosing their wealth over the health of the people they're creating living spaces for. Some may hesitate, some will resist, but the more we make just decisions, the harder it will be for greed and complacency to prevail. This is an opportunity to challenge the lack of creative problem solving and push past the standard, to challenge the norm of not caring about future generations that you won't live to see, of treating this power as a way to make ends meet instead of making new ways to be. Please send a message to everyone in a position of power to start using it for the planet and its people. We need to push as hard as we can and not just do the bare minimum to save face. Pass this bill in its most effective form possible. A gas-free buildings bill that bans the use of fossil fuel in all new buildings, including commercial renovations starting in 2024, gas stove replacements, and renovations that affect 75% of a building. Thank you for your time and all of the considerations since this bill was put forth.
Thanks. Okay. What would council like to do? Would you like to take a motion to close the hearing?
I would make a motion to close the hearing.
Remind me what happens when we close the hearing. So I heard a couple things that we might want to discuss next week. That means that we adjourn? Or
Well, so
Sorry.
if we close the hearing and we make significant changes, then we would reopen a new hearing.
Okay.
Right? So.
Second.
Yeah. No worries. All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay. Got through that all. Thank you all for your patience and your calm remarks. Reports. By the way, I've heard a report on the weather that it's snowing outside pretty significantly. So I would just encourage our reports to use the same level of brevity that many of our speakers in the audience did. Thank you. Start with
Okay, I know
Molly.
you gave me a look. So,
Yeah, I was giving you a look.
yes, so I want to thank the Main Street Access Committee and all those who came out to share their opinions and thoughts and care about the future of our community. And along those same lines, I also want to thank the school district and the Beacon Police Department for their swift response to the phone call that was received regarding a potential school shooting and bomb threat on Friday morning. And which might be something that Chris might choose to share a little bit more about, but I just really appreciate their work to make sure that everyone was safe. And I'll pass it to Justice.
Thank you, Molly. I will be hosting office hours in March, Tuesday, March 7th, from 6 to a little before 8 p.m. at the Howland Public Library. And if those hours don't work for you, on the city's website, beaconny.gov, under the City Council page, under my name, Justice McCray, you can now just schedule an appointment with me whenever an availability is there. And if for whatever reason my availability doesn't line up with yours, send me an email and we'll work it out. I am happy to talk to whoever, whenever, about anything. Let's see, what else? This past weekend was the Beacon Spring Celebration of Light, and I wanted to thank all of the organizers and everyone who participated and bared through the cold. It was a very lovely event, and it was wonderful. And then I would also like to kindly ask people to pick up after their dogs. Over the past few weeks, I've seen an increased amount of dog waste on Main Street and throughout the city, and it makes everyone's quality of life better when they don't have to worry about stepping in somebody else's dogs, you know. So I just ask that we kindly be aware of that. And lastly, keeping it brief, February is Black History Month. While I know it's not the city's obligation to acknowledge it, branches of government across the country, from school boards to state, are actively working to censor and erase Black history, and through whitewashing injustice and gatekeeping accomplishments. And while this is my last Black History Month in this position, I hope that in years to come that the city at a minimum acknowledges Black History Month through proclamations, or perhaps working through the HRC to do some initiatives or some sort. I would love to see this progressive city do more, and I hope to see that in the future. That being said, if you'd like to learn more about Black history, I'm leading a presentation tomorrow entitled Black Futures, History, Trailblazers, and Visions of Liberation at 7 p.m. at the Desmond Fish Public Library, barring that it's not closed because of snow. And I will pass it to George.
Thanks, Justice. I just want to report quickly that it looks like finally Beacon might be getting FiOS. If you've seen Verizon trucks throughout Beacon, they are installing FiOS, so it looks like Optimum will finally have a little bit of competition in town. So I think that'll be good for all. But we'll confirm that with Verizon. But I just anecdotally spoke to one of the technicians, and he said, in fact, he was, and it should be ready by the summer. So good news for Beacon. And thank you all for coming tonight.
Go ahead.
Great. Okay. I wanted to reiterate what Molly said in thanks to our police department for responding promptly to the hoax bomb threat at our schools. I know that this was a really scary incident, and wanted to highlight an encouragement to take care of all of our mental health needs whenever an incident like this comes up, and also every day. And it reminded me that there is a special meeting of Mutual Aid Beacon on March 14th. It is their monthly meeting at 6:30 p.m. at the VFW Hall. And one of the subjects that is going to be addressed is a potential community care team that is coming together, whose focus will be on addressing mental health needs throughout the community. I will also note that this is a care team that came out of last year's Community Quarterly. The Community Quarterlies are a regular program for participatory government and community engagement, where the council asks a central question. The question last year was around what makes our community safe. And we are currently relaunching that project tonight. And the way that this works is that we put out as a council a central question. I think topical to the conversation tonight, our central question is, what is a community climate initiative that you think the city should support? Obviously, there are a lot of ideas that have been addressed tonight that are going throughout the community, but we want to have a forum where we are inviting solutions and having a conversation around them, and then setting a priority for these ideas in a democratic fashion. You can find more information about all of this on the city's website, and also at bit.ly/BCQ1 survey. This will all be rolling out shortly. There's also flyers sitting next to me if you're curious. I also wanted to note that the emergency assistance for SNAP benefits is ending this Wednesday. I know that this has had a strong impact on many people in our community, especially through the pandemic. We've been seeing the ways in which food insecurity has impacted our community, and wanted to highlight some of the ways that you can access food even without the increased SNAP benefits. One is through Mutual Aid Beacon's grocery distributions. Fairground is another great organization that is supporting food security in our communities through the tiny food pantries and other food distributions. I encourage you to look up their websites, and also want to reiterate that both of these organizations operate off of this principle that if we each take what we need and give what we can, then we all end up in a happier, healthier community. And so if you have food, or you are in a place where you can volunteer to support the needs of your community, I encourage you to participate with these organizations in that way. And finally, wanted to also thank everyone who participated in the Beacon Spring celebration this past weekend. It was a really lovely space to be together and celebrate, sharing hope and joy. It was cold, but we had quite a few people come out. The part of the purpose of this event was to have a space for gratitude and reflection. Different cultures celebrate the new year at different times of the year, but while we are perhaps 2 months into 2023 according to the Gregorian calendar, we are still coming up on the renewal of the new year in many other cultures, and so just want to reiterate the joy that can come from carrying light through the darkness and coming out the other side of it. So, thank you.
Thanks, Paloma. And thank you for your work, and Dan, and everyone from Beacon on this legislation. I heard a lot tonight that was helpful and interesting. And yeah, so thanks for all of the hard work on that. Also, thank you to John and the Main Street Access Committee for a couple of years of really great work. Really excited about, and have been for 2 years, or ever since I saw you present to the last City Council about the bike plan and closing Cedar Street and the affordable housing, the possibilities of transforming city-owned property into affordable housing, and even thinking about how affordable businesses or small businesses could be a part of that. Just there's a lot of interesting potential there. And if you haven't gotten the memo, schools are closed tomorrow. That's it for me.
All right. Just very quickly, we'll be hosting office hours on Sunday, March 19th, from 10 to 12 at Trax Coffee House at 1 East Main. And that's my entire report.
Awesome. I'll be very quick. 2 repeat thank yous, 1 to the Main Street Access Committee, thank you. 2 for all the voices this evening, especially the laconic ones like Dan's, thank you. That means short. Thank you. Right? It's from the Greek for the area of Sparta. It's Lacedaemon. Those are the 2 thank yous. Justice, you're correct that this is the last day of Black History Month, which I have recognized in the past and kind of fell off the calendar, and it will be put back on. I related the story of the naming of the Benjamin O. Davis Barracks at West Point, which I had the opportunity to attend because my wife worked there for many years. It was the first black general, I'm forgetting the number of stars, but the founder of the Tuskegee Airmen. And it was a big deal, and it's the biggest building on campus, and they started to do the right things. So I just want to appreciate the recognition that this is the last day of Black History Month. And then finally, Molly, zoning Main Street access road to Matawan.
I'm going to follow up about that.
All right.
What?
Zoning,
Started trouble.
Main Street access road.
First two are pretty big. Access road.
Right?
Was there one after Access
How you
Road?
work it. No, that's the third.
That's the
just
third. Those three.
All
Great,
right.
thank you.
Okay. Thank you all for your patience. It's now 9:24 and the snow's coming down. Let's see what else we can do. Does the city administrator, you have something to update us on?
Well, I just wanted to follow on Molly's comments about the incident on Friday morning. We had a call saying that there was an individual with a firearm and bombs at the Roundabout School. Our police were just coming on shift, so everybody stayed who was supposed to go off shift and headed towards the schools. Their response was perfect. They quickly ascertained that it was a hoax. They also posted an armed officer in each of the schools to make sure that nothing was going to happen. They coordinated with Fishkill. They coordinated with the Beacon City School District. We don't believe that call came from Beacon. We believe that call came from out of state, and it's part of a spate of hoaxes. We have brought in the FBI to help with the investigation. But again, I just want to thank the school staff and the police department for showing us what an exemplary response to that situation is. And I know it was really stressful for a lot of people for much of that day. So I just want to remind you that this snow event that we haven't had so far this season, when you get more than 2 inches of this stuff, I'll just remind you to please clean off your sidewalks so that kids can walk to school and people can get safely down the street. And then finally, I just want to let nonprofits in the city know that next week we will be releasing the council's community investment grant program. Those are grants from $1,000 to $10,000 for nonprofit initiatives. This is the second year we've done it. We allocated $20,000 in the budget, and I'll announce it at next week's workshop just in case anybody missed this. And we will be putting announcements out on social media and our website. Thank you.
Okay. Do we need to amend the agenda?
That's a Drew question. I think we did it before the meeting, so I don't believe you need to take that action.
That is correct. The agenda items are already posted, so
Okay.
you could just
So we
proceed.
have two resolutions. Let's do them separately. One is appointing Kevin Powell to the position of firefighter. Let's do them together. Appointing.
No, you need to do them
separately?
Yeah, there's
Okay.
a seniority issue. Yes.
Okay, so Kevin Powell first to the position of firefighter. Chris, you're going to tell us why that is and why we want to do these now.
Okay, so two things have happened. One is that we put money in the budget for 2023 to hire a 17th firefighter, so that when we would lose a firefighter, we already have somebody that's gone to the fire training academy and is ready to go. We were interviewing for that, and about an hour before we did the interviews, we heard one of our firefighters is also transferring out. So rather than hiring one, we're also backfilling that position. We did interview 5 candidates on Friday. I'm rushing to get this through because we have a fire academy that's starting at the end of March. And in order for these applicants to give adequate time to their current employers, do physicals, get ready for it, and then make plans to go to the fire academy, which is 16 weeks, we really needed to do it tonight. So Kevin Powell was our top choice. He got 110 on the civil service. You get extra points for military service and for being injured in the military, both of which he had. Volunteer firefighter for 9 years. He works over at IBM in their emergency services. And then Kevin Herbst, also ex-military, scored either 100 or 105. I think Gary's memo was off. I think he was the second at 105. Also a volunteer firefighter. Both of them were certified in EMS, and they were the committee's unanimous choice. So we had a great pick. We didn't know that they would both accept so quickly, but as of 5 o'clock, they both accepted. And so I'm delighted to put their names before the council.
So on 17, I need a motion and a second on Kevin Powell.
Motion.
Second.
So that was Ren and Dan. This is on appointing Kevin Powell to the position of firefighter. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? And then I need a motion and a second for Kevin Herbst.
Motion.
Second.
So that's Dan and Molly, and this is on appointing Kevin Herbst to the position of firefighter. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
And thank you for getting us through. I know this was last minute, and I really appreciate it.
I'm looking for a motion and a second on the approval of minutes of February 14th.
Motion.
Yeah.
Dan
The
and,
other guy, right?
I'm sorry,
Second.
Oh, we did.
Dan and Paloma?
Yep.
Any discussion, we'll hesitate now, and if necessary, we'll hold a public hearing on the topic. But if not, all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Second opportunity for public comments. So if you did not speak previously and would like an opportunity to speak now, you may do so.
Martin Fowler, Ward 3. Do I not get to speak because I was in the hearing?
No, you do get to speak because
not on
public
that.
hearing doesn't count, and it was only if you spoke at the public comments. So
Okay.
please go ahead.
I just want to say the Main Street Access Committee, thank you very much. That's a really exciting report. There's some incredible stuff in there. I can really see our beautiful future before us here in Beacon there. And I just wanted to say thank you to the mayor and the council and the administrator for your constant responsiveness to the community and your patience. Thank you very much.
Yep. Seeing no movement in the aisles to rush up to speak, Ben, anyone in the public, in the electric arena?
There are no hands raised.
I will take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Molly and Dan, all in favor? Please get home safely. Good night.
Recording.